My name is Harold Harry Kalina, and I've been drinking coffee from the same cup for 14 years. The edge is chipped. The handle was glued on with superglue after it fell off a few years ago, and the hand-painted pelican design is almost worn away beyond recognition. Why is this cup so important to me? Because this is the only souvenir from my honeymoon in Key West with Gwen Kalina, my first wife. After 6 years of an almost idyllic marriage, Gwen died in a car accident. This in itself was a blow to me, but since the gods can be especially cruel, our unborn daughter left me along with her. The teenager who ran a red light and collided with Gwen's car was updating his Facebook page at the time. I admit that at the time I wanted this girl to endure unimaginable horrors before dying a terrible death. How could such a stupid action cause so much pain? Not just mine, but also to Gwen's parents, who lost their daughter and first grandson. A 17-year-old girl, Catherine Mellon, was charged with vehicular homicide and several other crimes. I put pressure on the district attorney and anyone else who could influence me to make sure that this young criminal, as I saw her, went to prison as much as the law would allow. I was prepared to sit in the courtroom every day of her trial, holding a photograph of Gwen and an ultrasound image of our daughter. I was ready until 2 months after the accident that killed my family. Catherine's father, Jacob Mellon, came to see me. I was initially reluctant to meet Jacob Mellon when he called to make an appointment. I consulted with my psychologist who helped me deal with a loss, and after discussing the pros and cons, I agreed to meet with Mr. Mellon. Mr. Kalina, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Let me start by expressing my condolences and apologies for the pain my daughter has caused. Is there a reason why your daughter can't apologize to herself? Katie wanted to come. I told her that I will meet you first. If you agree, she will come tomorrow. I assumed she was the last person you wanted to see. You're right. The only time I want to see your daughter is when the jury finds her guilty, when she is sentenced to prison, and when she burns in hell. Although Mellon expected a strong reaction, I could see that my words stunned him. It took him a few moments to recover and continue. Mr. Kalina, I will do whatever it takes to keep Katie out of jail. We're not rich people, but is there anything Katie and I can do to avoid jail time? Are you trying to bribe me with money? I started screaming. Because if you think you can buy me, then damn it, go for it. Sorry, that came out wrong. I never dreamed of offering you money. I heard that your wife was a nurse. I was thinking about a medical school scholarship in her name, something like that. I also want you to know that Catherine accepts full responsibility for her actions. She is ready to admit guilt. She's ready to go to jail. It is I who beg you to come up with another punishment. I know what happens in prison, even in juvenile prisons. My daughter won't last a month there. And yes, I understand that now you would like to see this happen, for her to suffer, but I just can't let that happen. I saw Mellon try to hold back his tears as he spoke, but damn it, I wanted my ounce of flesh. You have no idea what it's like to lose everything. Perhaps if you lose your daughter, you will understand my pain. That's where you're wrong, Mr. Kalina. My wife died 2 years ago from cancer. I saw her disappear after all the chemo and radiation treatments failed to save her life. It wasn't the same. Her death was not caused by a thoughtless, stupid act. But like you, I lost my best friend and partner. I know what is it. My hatred for this man, who brought into the world the girl who took my family away from me, began to fade slightly. Bring Catherine here tomorrow and we can talk. I don't promise anything, but I will meet her. Catherine came with her father the next day. If she is not an actress with Meryl Streep's capabilities, then her remorse and apology were sincere. It was an extremely emotional meeting, and I was proud that I resisted the desire to strangle her. The next day, I hired a private investigator to find out about the life of Catherine Mellon. The PC returned with information that surprised me. Miss Mellon was a National Honor Society student, a leader in her school with an excellent reputation, and a volunteer at the local hospital on the children's ward. After the death of her mother from cancer, Catherine began spending time in the pediatric oncology ward. I also asked several knowledgeable people about Jacob Mellon's claim that juvenile prison was as bad as he said. The answers I received were yes, children like Catherine will not leave prison unscathed. Now I had to ask myself, did I want this young lady's life to be ruined? Did I hate her that much? This was not an easy decision. I discussed this with Gwen's parents. I discussed it with friends I trusted. I discussed this with my therapist. There was almost unanimous opinion. Let go of the need for revenge. Find a way to give meaning to Gwen's life and death. Gwen's parents were the most persistent, especially when I was discussing Jacob Mellon's proposal for a scholarship in Gwen's honor. Gwen's mother kissed my cheek with tears in her eyes. Harold, you know in your heart that if you had asked Gwen, she wouldn't have wanted revenge. She would want something good to come out of this tragedy. I met with the assistant district attorney and we came up with a plan. Catherine admits her guilt. She will be given a suspended sentence, but if she gets pulled over again for inattentive driving, she will serve her time. She will have to perform thousands of hours of community service, not only at the hospital, but also giving lectures to students about the dangers of texting while driving. She would have to give these lectures and show pictures of Gwen and our daughter. She will have to tell how she caused the death of 2 innocent people and caused suffering to their loved ones. You've read about people whose love turns to hate after a traumatic event such as betrayal. But I never considered the other side of this coin, how a person can learn to love someone whom he first hated. Now I know that this is possible, because after spending time with Catherine, my hatred for this young lady melted. I began to love her, not in a romantic sense, but the way an uncle loves his niece. By the time Catherine's hearing began, I was on the side of the motion to suspend any prison sentence. I don't know who exactly came up with this idea. I think it was someone from the sheriff's office. But someone thought that my appearance with Catherine at a lecture on the dangers of inattentive driving might have a greater effect. I doubted, but I was convinced that even if these sessions saved one life, I would have fulfilled my civic duty. The sessions reminded me of the old TV series Scared Straight, in which hardened prisoners told a group of teenagers how terrible their lives could become if they ended up in prison. Whoever designed Catherine's sessions did it quite well. Dry statistics were combined with real-life stories of bloodshed caused by texting while driving. The impact of each session was magnified because Catherine and I were the facilitators. We held sessions approximately every 2 weeks, in schools, churches, community organizations, and Boy Scout meetings. For me, this was another way to turn my personal tragedy inside out. It was probably the 10th session when I realized. I watched Catherine give her part of an evening presentation to a group of Boy Scouts and realized it was almost as if Catherine was getting some kind of endorphin rush, presenting her story of guilt, and Shamay spent an hour with my consultant 2 days later discussing what I saw and felt. He agreed. There was every possibility that the sessions were cathartic for Catherine. This does not mean that she did not feel guilt or shame. It means that she used the sessions to cope with her inner anxiety. Whatever the reason, I couldn't be a part of this show anymore and left the next week. Catherine and I have lost touch with each other. She went to college to become a hospice nurse, of all places. Every year Catherine sends me a Christmas card. 3 years ago, she wrote that she got married. This year, she posted that she was expecting a baby in March. She asked if she could name the girl Gwen if she had a daughter. I answered and said that I would be happy if her child bore my wife's name. Somehow this makes me feel better, knowing that the young woman who took so much from me still cares and is trying to make up for that one stupid mistake she made all those years ago. After I stopped doing these sessions with Catherine, my recovery began to decline. I started drinking. At least 4 or 5 nights a week, you could find me sitting behind the counter at Donovan's bar drinking bourbon or rye whiskey. That's where I met Haley. Haley, the bartender, became my close friend and confidante. She became my friend for 2 very good reasons. Haley always took a few moments between serving other clients to listen to my stories of loneliness and, more importantly, Haley always made me strong. Haley was a beautiful woman. I could do without the tattoos on her arms, but that was my opinion. Why ruin a beautiful canvas with something you might regret 10 or 20 years from now? She was a wonderful listener, and not in the bartender looking for a big tip sense. She listened as I told her about Gwen, her death, and my work. Haley and I seemed to have a lot in common, and I would like to ask her out. But she had a boyfriend named Lonnie. Until one day she started crying and told me that she and Lonnie broke up because he was constantly cheating on her. That was all I needed to hear. I waited a couple of days so as not to look like a vulture, and suggested that we meet Haley for dinner outside the bar, just to talk. Haley looked at me with her big, beautiful green eyes. Just talk. How disappointing. 3 days later, I picked up Haley from the bar after her day shift. She asked to give her a few minutes to change out of jeans and a t-shirt. I sat and waited, drinking Jack Daniels. Haley walked out of the manager's office, and I nearly fell out of my chair. Haley was wearing a thin silk blouse and a short skirt that barely covered her butt. Her long legs ended in a pair of 4-inch heels that screamed, "Take me." As Haley walked toward me, wrapping her arm around my waist, she whispered in my ear, "Ready?" I tried to come up with some witty answer to her question, trying not to look at those delicious breasts stretching the thin fabric, but I couldn't. Haley followed my gaze to her target and smiled at me with understanding. Without another word, she pulled me out of my chair and led me to the door, waving goodbye to the drunks and waitresses. Dinner was fantastic. We immediately hit it off on many levels. As we finished our last drinks, cognac for me, Bailey's for her, Haley got straight to the point. "Harry, I've liked you for a long time, but didn't do anything while she was with Lonnie. But Lonnie is gone now, and I don't see any reason why we couldn't spend the night having sex with each other until we passed out. Can you think of a reason?" Before I could finish my drink, I stood up and picked up Haley by the upper arm. I kissed her on the lips, grabbed my credit card from the table, and led Haley towards the exit while calling an Uber with my other hand. 10 minutes later, we were in my apartment, and 3 minutes after that we were in bed, naked. Our first sex did not require foreplay. It was fantastic. Can we get some sleep and then do this again? Who was I to disagree? It was the first night of Harry and Haley's life. I was worried that we were both on the rebound. 18 months have passed since Gwen died, but I haven't actually been dating anyone this whole time. And Haley broke up with Lonnie just a few weeks ago. Maybe we were moving too fast, but like I said, we just got along well on so many levels, and the sex was incredible. We started spending at least 2 evenings a week together, and at least 1 day every weekend from that night. I was dating a bartender, but I started drinking less. I didn't need it because the dark cloud I was living under seemed to be leaving. I cut back on visiting Donovan a couple times a week. 3 months after the lease on her apartment expired, Haley moved in with me. We rarely fought, and when we did, the post-reconciliation sex was fantastic. I think we both sometimes started fights just to make up in bed. With my new outlook on life came an unexpected side effect. 6 months after Haley moved in, I received a promotion and a significant increase in salary as my productivity increased. I called her to tell her we had reason to celebrate. "See if you can take a 4-day weekend next week. I want to take you out of town." On Friday morning, we flew first class to Miami International Airport. We had a room at the Marriott right on South Beach. We had dinner at a wonderful Cuban restaurant and danced until 2 in the morning in a nightclub. On Saturday morning, we slept a little longer, then had lunch and headed to the beach for the day. Where do all these beautiful people come from? Haley fit in among the beautiful people on the beach and in the clubs. At first, I thought I had made a mistake in bringing Haley to South Beach when, while we were dancing on Saturday night, the NBA star tried to seduce her. Any doubts I had about my plan for the weekend were erased when Haley dismissed him with one sentence. "No, I'm here with my boyfriend." Sunday, another day at the beach. Haley surprised me by wearing a new bikini. This was the first time I had heard of the Wicked Weasel brand. It consisted of a tiny sheer top and tiny thong panties. Haley's C-cup breasts barely fit into her top, and her beautiful butt cheeks glistened in the sun. We had dinner that evening in a nice, quiet, chic restaurant. When the waiter brought us our afternoon drinks, I decided it was time. Taking a small box from my jacket pocket, I got down on one knee and asked, "Haley, will you marry me?" Haley looked at the 2-carat diamond, then into my eyes, placed both hands on my head, knelt down in front of me, and answered, "Yes." I paid for an insanely expensive dinner, and as we were leaving this expensive diner, I stopped, turned around, and shouted, "Hey, all you fucking losers," and showed them all his butt. We couldn't stop laughing the whole way back to the hotel. 4 months later, a small civil wedding took place in front of a judge. For 7 months life was full of pleasures. Then it stopped. Call me stupid, naive, or gullible. Just don't call me a weakling. Little things in my relationship with Haley began to change. At first, I couldn't point to anything in particular and say, "That's it." But there were little things that if I hadn't been so busy at work might have been more obvious. Our sex life seemed to deteriorate. Of course, married couples always make more love in the first year of a relationship. But damn, we barely made it past the first year. There were more unexplained hours each week when Haley didn't seem to answer calls or wasn't where I thought she should be. There are many little things, many things that a man in love will try to explain by any other reason than the real one. Could my loving wife be cheating on me? Any man who has experienced and pondered such thoughts knows this feeling. Please, anything but this. After a month of suspicion, trying to ignore the signs, I broke down and hired a private investigator. Perhaps this is a good time to give readers a little more information, somewhat I didn't share until now. When Gwen died in that accident, she had life insurance through her employer for $250,000. The policy paid out twice that amount for an accidental death. The Mellons insurance company paid out another $500,000. All the money was in a brokerage account. I didn't touch a cent of it. But I must have told Haley about it at some point last year when I was drinking and talking too much. Which explains how 2 weeks later, when my private investigator returned with a preliminary report, I learned the meaning of the word mercenary. "Mr. Kalina, I hate to say this, but your wife is dating a man named Lonnie Douglas. I thought it necessary to find out more about this Douglas. He left the state for a year and a half, worked on an oil platform in the Gulf of Mexico. He returned to the city 8 weeks ago. He lives in a trailer park in the south of the city. That's where they meet several times a week. We have photos of her going in and out of his trailer, but we weren't able to get a photo of them together in an intimate setting. Sorry." I tried not to vomit as I listened to the details of my wife's betrayal. Trying to concentrate, I asked, "What are you suggesting?" "We can install a recording device on your landline phone, but I wouldn't expect her to use it as long as she has a cell phone. They never seem to meet at your house, so we won't get a video of them making love. Is there a way to force her to use the landline? Maybe cancel her data plan or something?" "No, she has her own tariff, and she pays her own cell phone bill. It will not happen. Give me a day or two, I'll try to come up with something. In the meantime, install a recording device on my landline phone, just in case." In the end, I chose the simplest path. Late Friday night, when I knew Haley had to work all day the next Saturday, I took her phone and smashed it to smithereens. On Saturday morning, Haley searched throughout the house for him before she had to leave for work. On Monday, I listened to the recording of Sunday call. I had everything I needed. Here is the transcript of the Sunday morning call. "Haley, damn it, I've been calling you since last night. Why haven't you answered or responded to my texts? Lonnie, why are you calling me here? My cell phone is missing, and I called you yesterday from the tavern, but you didn't answer. Damn, was it you? I didn't recognize the number and thought it was some idiot my ex set on me to get more child support. Damn, You're such an idiot. I need to replace my phone today. I'll text you when it's activated. Haley, I'm tired of this crap. Divorce this asshole, take your half of his money, and let's get back together. I'm tired of waiting here while you sleep with this asshole. We decided it would only be a year, but it's already been 15 months. $500,000 seemed like a lot when we decided to rip him off. But every time I think about you in bed with that bastard, I lose control. If you don't do it within the next month, I'll leave. Lonnie, calm down. Give me 4 weeks, 6 at the most. I'll figure out how to make the breakup his fault. Walk away with $500,000, and you and I will be set for life. Please, darling, trust me. By the end of the year, we will be together and rich. The call ended, but I've heard enough. Damn, how could I be so stupid? How did I end up married to a harpy who only wanted my money? I was sad, but most of all I was furious with this bitch. I could barely contain myself as I took the necessary steps to end my relationship with Haley. My lawyer was a shark. He knew what needed to be done and did it with enthusiasm. Haley claimed in court that she was bringing me back to life after the death of my first wife. My lawyer countered that Haley's betrayal had set me back further than when she met me. Justice can be blind, but fortunately for me, it is not deaf. When the judge heard the recording of Haley's conversation with Lonnie, he ruled in my favor. No halving, no alimony. Haley was allowed to withdraw from our account as much as she contributed to the marriage, keep her clothes and a wedding ring. Haley tried to talk to me several times. She even tried the old trick. She refused to sign the divorce papers until I sat down to talk to her. I told her to go to hell and that I was willing to wait a full year even if she didn't sign. As a result, she came up to me at the exit from work and handed me an envelope. She turned and walked away, but I called out to her. Haley, she turned around. I held the envelope in my hands above my head and tore it in half, throwing the 2 halves into the air. Last I heard, Haley had left Donovan and moved to the coast with Lonnie. I've heard that troubles come in threes, and this happened to me. My wife cheated on me, my therapist retired, and the punchline was the company I worked for was bought and I was given a layoff. Oh, they gave me a couple of months severance pay and the promise of a good reference, but I really liked my job and didn't get a single decent offer in response to the 200 resumes I sent out. I became desperate. I had money, but there was nothing left in my life that could help me get up in the morning, except for the hours spent in the gym. There must have been a very angry cloud over my head because the 2 or 3 women I met at the gym all turned down my offer to have a cup of coffee together. 5 months after the divorce and 3 months after being fired, I got lucky. An Arizona computer company, Bibliotechna, was looking for a salesperson for the Midwest region. It was a commission-based reward system to sell their systems. They would teach me the system, but everything else was up to me. Researching potential clients, cold calling, my travel expenses, training the client after installing the system, all of this. Either sell or starve. No one else was knocking on my door to hire me, and with every week without work, I became more and more depressed. I spent more time sitting behind the bar, so I decided to hell with it, and took the job. I'm 6 feet 1 inch tall, and I'm in great shape because I spend 5 days in the gym every week. I have dark Mediterranean skin like my father and dark blue Nordic me mother's eyes. I have a full head of hair and the gift of gab when I'm not depressed, which puts people at ease, especially women. I spent the next 3 years trying to get these assets to work. I sold library computer systems, monitors, servers, and software to medium-sized city and county libraries. I'm embarrassed to admit that the hardware was cheap Chinese crap and the software wasn't much better. How did I manage to sell this crap? Well, if you know anything about libraries, you know that most libraries are run by women. Women serve on library boards, and libraries themselves are staffed almost exclusively by women. I did the research. It took time. But when I arrived in town, I knew there was a decent chance, almost 50-50, that I would leave in a couple of weeks with at least 200,000 worth of sales for my employer and a fifth's commission. Sales. I was an excellent salesman, with little hesitation, and was not averse to enticing one or more ladies to make a sale. I can come up with all sorts of excuses, give 100 excuses for my behavior. But the truth is that I have lost my orientation and moral compass. I was careful in one respect. I didn't want Harry Collin growing up in the Midwest. And perhaps some of my victories actually benefited as much from our romance as I did. I mean, some of these women were nice to look at. Some had probably never been on a date in the last 10 years. Only a few would be considered attractive. So, perhaps a short romance with a cute guy will be a highlight for them. They were all adults. They all knew that I was a traveling salesman, and I never promised to change my life for any of them. I really regretted that the systems I sold would be worthless in a few years. Monitors and servers probably had a lifespan of 4 or 5 years, and the software support they received was less than desirable. I probably had another year before the first systems I sold started to fail. Then I will have to look for a new job. The internet makes information too accessible. Bad reviews will start appearing, and it will be almost impossible to sell junk, no matter how good the seller is. I drove into the mid-sized town of Polk, Indiana, just across the Illinois border. It was the middle of summer, and even though it was 11 in the morning, it was damn hot and the humidity made it unbearable. I had enough free time. My meeting with the head librarian, Director Marion Howard, did not take place until 1 o'clock, so I stopped at Denny's to get something cold. The air conditioning worked well and helped keep me from sweating through my white shirt. I used this time to chat with the waitress, trying to get some gossip about the city and such. Since there was still half an hour left before lunch, Alice was not busy and found herself in possession of a huge amount of information. Alice filled the sugar bowls and salt shakers while I sat at the counter and listened. Hell, I could pay the pie $1,000 and not get half of what Alice gave me for a $2 tip. I learned about the mayor's affair with his administrator, about the mayor's wife and her attempts to even the score by cheating with the guy who owns the bakery. All good gossip, but nothing that would help me. Neither the mayor, nor his wife, nor the baker were on the library's board of trustees. But I learned something. Mrs. Marion Howard appears to be a widow. Her husband was a state trooper who died in a tragic accident when a semi-trailer hit his car during a routine traffic stop. The Howards had a son, whom Mrs. Howard raised with the help of her mother-in-law. And the best part is that Marion Howard was not dating anyone. I parked the car in front of the library and checked my appearance in the visor mirror. Hair in place, razor sparkling, nothing stuck in my teeth, tie straight. I was ready. I smiled at my reflection and said to myself, "Let's begin." I grabbed my briefcase and ran up the steps straight into a new understanding of myself. I was clearly not prepared for who greeted me when I walked into Miss Howard's office that afternoon. She stood up from her chair and leaned across the large oak table to shake my hand. She had a face as beautiful as a Hollywood star. "Mr. Kalina, we have finally met." My embarrassment at her greeting clearly showed on my face because she immediately explained the reason. "I know Miss Rose Peters very well, the director of the library in Falls Junction, Iowa. Rose and I were roommates at the University of Illinois." This was not good. Rose Peters was one of my previous conquests. This happened last year. I still had a chance to make the sale, though. The Falls Junction system was still new and working great. And most importantly, I think Rose and I parted on good terms. Marion continued to dazzle me with her straightforward approach. "Could we skip the seduction and focus on what your system can do to modernize our library?" Marion Howard said this with a slight smile on her lips, but I really remember her eyes sparkling when she smiled. Without being too noticeable and still looking into those beautiful blue eyes, my peripheral vision registered that this woman had an incredibly sexy body. Despite her reluctance, I knew that I would do my best and eventually win Miss Marion Howard. Thoughts were already spinning in my head about how this could be accomplished. But first, let's get down to business. I moved on to my sales presentation. Over the next 2 hours, Marian described exactly what she needed to do to achieve the goals of the library board of directors. I did my best to convince Marian that the Bibliotechna system was cutting edge and would meet all her library needs for the next decade. Marian listened to my presentation, asked difficult questions. I could not answer some questions. I promised to return to her the next day after talking with the head office. We haven't even touched on the price issue, and I'm already sweating. We ended the meeting, and I was heading out the door, on my way to the motel to call Phoenix, when Marian surprised me. It must be hard to be on the road all the time, eating out in restaurants all the time. Would you like to join me and my family for a home-cooked meal? My mother-in-law is a great cook. I would like, but I need to call the office. Here is our address. Dinner at 6. If you change your mind, call me here before 5. Otherwise, come anytime after 5:15. I left the library shaking my head. Librarians are generally very nice people, but not nearly as friendly as Miss Howard. I laughed at myself. Which one of us is playing? I drove to my motel room, made calls to Phoenix, and asked them to send responses before my next meeting with Marian the next afternoon. Then he washed his face and changed into a casual shirt. I spent most of the time trying to figure out how to turn this to my advantage and get into Marian's pants. The Howard house was like something from the last century, before World War II. Everything except the white fence. It was a white craftsman-style house with a beautiful covered porch on the front and one side. The front yard was dotted with flowering bushes. There was even an American flag flying from one of the poles. A woman in her 60s, but moving like a trained athlete, walked out the front screen door as I approached the path with the obligatory bouquet of flowers and a bottle of wine. You must be Mr. Kalina, so glad. Marian is upstairs changing. She'll be a little late. She asked me to entertain you for a moment. I'm Audrey Howard, mother of Marian's husband. Before I could do anything, or to say, Audrey grabbed my hand and pulled me towards the house. As she walked up the front stairs, she asked, "What can I get you, Mr. Burris Kalina? Beer, iced tea, open your wine, or maybe a cocktail. I will make a great Manhattan." "Please, Miss Howard, call me Harry. I could use a beer." "Then you should call me Audrey. I'll be right back with a beer. Have a seat." Audrey left the room. That's the only way to describe how she moved. She returned with a bottle and glass. "Pour?" "Yes, please." She poured the beer into a glass and handed it to me before turning to make herself a drink from the small bar cabinet. "Rose Peters visited us last Easter and had great things to say about you. Marian and I couldn't wait to meet you. How's the beer? I only had pale ale in the fridge. Hope it suits you." "It's perfect." I felt like I was in some episode of The Twilight Zone. Apparently, Rose shared some details of our relationship with Audrey and Marian. But how detailed? My thoughts wandered to some terrible movie I had seen years ago in which 3 women kidnapped a man who had seduced all 3 of them and held him for sex. I couldn't remember, but it seems the film ended badly for the man. I nervously looked around the room until my eyes fell on a framed photo of a handsome man in a uniform. Audrey's gaze followed mine. "This is my son Ron, Marian's late husband. He was a regular police officer and died last year. Stupid accident. It was raining and Ron pulled over a drunk driver. The truck hit Ron's patrol car as he was getting out of it." Audrey walked over to the photo and took it, starting to tear up. "My first wife died in an accident when another driver ran a red light. She was pregnant with our first child." Audrey looked at me with sympathy in her eyes. "It's so hard, isn't it? I don't know how Marian will cope with raising little Ronnie on her own." "She has you." "Only until the fall, when Ronnie goes to school for the whole day. I'll move back to Florida. I have a boyfriend who has been very patient these last 15 months while I've been here." My thoughts were interrupted when Marion entered the room, wearing short shorts and a white short-sleeved shirt. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and she was still smiling all over her face. "Hey, Harry. Thanks for coming. I see your mom already bought you a beer. I'm going to grab myself some iced tea." Before I could answer, she ran out of the room. Damn, what a nice ass she has in those shorts, and those long legs ending in her beautiful bare feet. Audrey finally put up the photo. "I'll go check on dinner. I hope you like your pasta and sauce." "Sauce? Oh, it's tomato sauce. Where I grew up, everyone calls spaghetti sauce. Well, I'm half Italian, so spaghetti and sauce sound great." Audrey left the room and Marion entered. Audrey turned on the radio in the kitchen. I thought we could talk without prying ears. "Marion, you and Audrey seem to know more than I would like about my relationship with Rose." "Don't worry about Mom. She doesn't know about the sex part. She just knows we were dating and Rose said she enjoyed spending time with you. Yes, she told me we were intimate, but without details, no worry. Rose actually told me how you helped her deal with terrible self-esteem issues after her divorce. Said that if a guy like you could show such interest in her, then she must be prettier and have more qualities than she thought. Her husband went to some bimbo. After you left, she was happy when you sent a couple of letters, wrote how you liked the time spent with her. She started dating and is now engaged to a very sweet, handsome, and successful doctor. She claims it's all thanks to you." The way Marion described it, I began to think that maybe I wasn't as bad as I thought. This is true. I used seduction as part of my sales strategy, but I always tried to leave women's feeling that our time together mattered, and it was especially easy with Rose. She was a wonderful woman, and I always supported every deal with at least one letter and a bouquet of roses. I spent the next 20 minutes listening to Marion's stories about her time at university when she was Rose's roommate. Marion shared a few funny stories before Audrey poked her head into the room. "Dinner is in 5 minutes. Ronnie needs to come home and wash his hands." Marion pulled her cell phone out of her back pocket. "Sue, hi, can you send Ronnie home?" Marion listened, blushed a little, lowered her voice, and answered the question. "No, he's a traveling salesman trying to sell a computer system to the library. I invited him to dinner with one of Mom's dishes. Stop fooling around." Marion pressed the end button on her phone and looked at me with confusion. "My neighbor saw you drive up and thinks you're cute. By the end of the evening, all the local gossip will be picking up their phones and talking about the man in my house. Sometimes small-town life can get a little too busy." I laughed at Marion's remark, hoping I don't look like some big city lady's man. I grew up in Chicago and now spend most of my time in small towns. I see the advantages and disadvantages of both. I don't know about city life, but after Ron died, it was nice to have the support of so many neighbors and the community, so I'll take a little of the bad with all the good. At that moment, a small hurricane burst into the house. He stopped and stared. "Who is it?" "Ronnie, this is Mr. Collins. He is our guest for dinner tonight. Harry, this is my son, Ronnie." We shook hands and exchanged greetings before Marion told Ronnie to go wash his hands for dinner. Dinner was great. Spaghetti with meatballs and garlic bread. Not only the food, but the whole atmosphere was wonderful. I don't remember the last time I sat at a family dinner. Ronnie turned out to be a sharp 5-year-old boy. He was upset to find out that my favorite football team was the Bears and not his, the real Colts. He perked up when I told him that the Colts had beaten my favorite Bears in Super Bowl 41, which was a few years before he was born. I learned more about Audrey's boyfriend in Tampa. He was a 68-year-old former metallurgist who was currently building a house for both of them. Audrey didn't have to know that Daniel was going to propose to her as soon as she returned from Indiana. "He's building a house to sell. He doesn't know if you'll accept his offer." I think he knows, but anyway, it gives him something to do. He hates golf, and his knees can't handle tennis. He reads books, but can only sit still for a few hours at a time. It doesn't matter anyway, I'll say yes. I love this guy. I told some stories from my childhood in Chicago, but avoided mention of his 2 marriages, trying to keep the conversation light. After dinner, Ronnie asked me to play catch with him with my Andrew Luck autographed American football. We went out into the backyard and tossed the ball back and forth while discussing his favorite movies and TV shows, none of which were familiar to me. I tried to show interest. After an hour and a half, I decided it was time to go. I thanked everyone for a great dinner and headed to the motel. It took me several hours to fall asleep, looking at the TV and then at the ceiling. Something was happening to me. I began to think of Marion not as a conquest, but as a woman I would like to know better. The next day at noon, I was back at Marion's desk. She greeted me with a smile. We sat down and discussed the answers I received from head office to yesterday's questions. I then gave her an estimate of how much the system would cost. I promised to submit a formal proposal within a week. Harry, I have to ask, how is it that the Bibliotechna system costs so much less than your competitors' offerings? Even the top end of your estimate is $50,000 less than the next most expensive offering. I can't afford to be wrong. The library board of directors already thinks I can't cope. If I don't choose the right system, I'll lose my job, and I need this job. I must have gone crazy, because the next words from my mouth could not have come from a sane person. Then don't take us up on our offer. You'll get 3 good years out of our hardware, 4 or 5 if you're lucky. After a few years, you'll notice more glitches, and our call center support in India will be abysmal. What about the price difference? My board will be wondering why I didn't choose the lowest cost supplier. I'll raise the price. That way you won't have to justify choosing another supplier. Why are you doing this? Because I'm tired of selling crap, tired of selling my soul. The bad things that happened to me turned me into someone I don't recognize. You obviously didn't let your husband's death turn your soul inside out. I'll quit this work immediately after I write your proposal. You will receive our proposal tomorrow, and it will not be lower than what you have already received from others. I stood up, suddenly feeling the need to leave her office. Thanks for dinner last night, and thanks for sharing your table with me. Thank your mother-in-law, too. Tell her I wish her the best in her marriage to that guy in Tampa. Give your son a hug. He's going to grow up to be a wonderful young man. As I was leaving her office, she called out to me, "Bye, Harry. Good luck." I submitted my resignation to Bibliotechna. They didn't like it because I was one of their 2 best salespeople. They held out for another 2 years. The equipment was failing, and another, well-established company selling an excellent library system sued them for similarity in name and infringement of several patents. As a result, Bibliotechna went bankrupt and closed. I returned home and looked at my miserable apartment. It wasn't a bad place to live as long as I was on the road more than half the time, but living here full-time would be terrible. I thought about what I should do. I didn't need to rush. I had over $1 million in my accounts. I was thinking about where I should live. I was considering hanging a world map on the wall and throwing a dart at it. Luckily, I didn't have any darts. I sat in the only decent piece of furniture, a leather crate that Gwen gave me for our 5th anniversary. I remembered how she loved to sit on my lap in this chair when we talked about the future, about our dreams and fantasies. One day, we were playing a wishing game. What would you like to become if you could become anything? Gwen's desire was to become a mother. My desire was to become a professional baseball player, preferably a second baseman for the Chicago Cubs. Gwen told me reproachfully, "No, silly, it has to be something realistic." What? Are you saying I'm not good enough to play for the Cubs? I'm saying I've seen enough of your softball games to know that you'll never get a double out with someone sliding into you that fast. Well, she was right about that, so there was no point in arguing. Now I had to come up with another fantasy about the profession. My second choice was the Indy racer. But our conversation that evening reminded me of my other dream if I had money and knowledge. I'd like to restore vintage cars or work as a technician for a racing team. Gwen was surprised. Really, cars? I didn't know you were interested in that. How could I not know that? Probably because I gave up on that dream after my third year of college. In high school and the first 2 years of college, I worked part-time in a garage, did simple things, oil changes, tuning, simple repairs. Then, after my internship at Merrill Lynch, I turned into the broker, the Mr. Jacket and tie you met and married. My days as a mechanic are behind me. Gwen laughed. That explains why you have such a dreamy look when one of those Italian sports cars drives by. If it were a woman, I'd be angry and jealous because of the way you look. So why don't we have more luxury cars? I thought before answering Gwen. Probably because if I can't own one of those, I'm not interested in owning the one in second place. So I prefer to have a Toyota sedan that sits in our garage. Does that make sense? Besides, if we're going to have children, we don't want a two-seater car. Gwen hugged me. Thank you, Harry. I love you. Gwen didn't have to say it. We were going to fulfill her dream of a career. She would get pregnant before the end of the year. About 4 years after that conversation, I was sitting in the same chair, remembering that wonderful evening. It took a lot of willpower for me to stand up and not grab the Jim Beam bottle in the closet. Instead, I thought, why not? I have money, time, and no obligations. And the most important thing, I still have the desire. So why not? And, as it turned out, I had the ability. I went to a technical college near Atlanta. All my earthly possessions, including my leather chair, were sent to storage outside of Chicago. I lived in a furnished studio apartment for 18 months while I studied. Then I found myself in Phoenix, working for 8 months as an apprentice for a company that restored luxury cars for basically all the new millionaires working at high-tech companies in Silicon Valley. It was funny for me to watch some of these guys. Many of them had never driven a manual car, and here they were coming out of our store driving $250,000 cars that could go over 200 miles an hour. We made a ton of money offering manual driving lessons. In the last month of my apprenticeship, a wealthy gentleman, the CEO of a steel company that, incidentally, sponsored one of Indy's cars, came to the store with his 25-year-old wife. They recently purchased a red 1997 Ferrari F355 Spider that she just had to have. The problem was that the damn car wasn't working right, and neither of the first 2 mechanics they called could figure out why. Even their own race team's mechanics couldn't spare time because it was the middle of the racing season. Someone suggested they bring her to Phoenix. The car was on a trailer that was towing their Escalade. I unloaded the Ferrari from the trailer, placed it in the spare box, and decided to stay to inspect it after everyone else had left for the night. It was old-school work, using pressure gauges and measuring instruments without connecting to a computer and running a diagnostic program. After a few hours, I was confident that I had found the problem, but only because of Carlos's notes about a similar problem with a car he had restored 8 years ago. I made adjustments following Carlos' notes. It was already past midnight, but it seemed like the perfect time for a test drive. I spent the 5 miles to I-10 warming up the car, then took the west exit. 10 miles west of town, I picked up speed, but kept the speed below 90. At exit 69, I turned around and headed east to exit 81, keeping my eyes on the road. At exit 81, I turned around again and headed west. This time I let the Ferrari run wild, slowing to 90 only 3 times when passing other drivers heading in the same direction. It wasn't worth giving someone a heart attack. I drove 12 miles between exits in just under 5 minutes. Returning to the workshop, I sent the owner a message. Your Ferrari is ready for collection. The next morning, my boss was a little annoyed, but also a little pleased when I told him everything. He almost smiled when he said, "Damn show off." He actually smiled when he wrote out the bill for $1,275. He was ready to send me home as soon as the owners arrived. When Mr. Treachery's CEO found out that I was an apprentice looking for a permanent job in a month, He gave me his business card with his chief mechanic's name on it and told me to call him. Nothing came of this first call, but a year later they called me when they needed a temporary mechanic. I was working in the pits 2 days before the big race at Brickyard. Our car had completed its practice laps an hour earlier, and we were completing a few modifications that our driver had recommended. As I stood up to stretch my muscles, I heard someone calling my name. Harry Kalina. I believe I went to the source of the sound and saw her beautiful face. Standing next to her was Audrey, and next to Audrey was a 70-year-old mountain man. Marion, what a surprise. Audrey, as always, you look beautiful. I pointed to my dirty hands, explaining why I couldn't shake hands or hug them. Audrey smiled at my compliment. Harry, this is my husband, Daniel Morrison. Daniel, Harry used to sell computer systems for libraries and now apparently works on race cars. What an interesting transition, Harry. I'd love to hear how this happened. I could treat you to dinner tonight and tell you all about it. I still owe you for the delicious pasta sauce Ronnie and I enjoyed together. I looked at Marion. How is your son doing? He must be 8 years old by now. Marion's smile grew even wider. What a memory you have. Donnie turned 8 last month. He's home with my parents. They drove up from Tucson so I could come to the races with my mom and Daniel. This is my first time at Indy. Audrey chimed in. Daniel comes here at least every 2 years and does it in a big way. His old boss has a box and still invites Daniel. That's how we got these pit passes. We decided Marion should experience it for herself. What a pleasure to meet you. I need to finish work here. Will you join me for dinner? It'll be a little late. I'll work until 6 and then take at least an hour to clean up and get rid of the smell. Where are you staying? Daniel chimed in. At the Hyatt Regency. We can have dinner at their restaurant. If that suits you, we'll book a table for 8. We arranged to meet before they left for autographs and souvenirs. I went back to work. Dinner that night reminded me why I loved sitting at the table with this family. Daniel seemed to replace Ronnie as conversational lubricant. He told great stories and made the 3 of us laugh. I learned a little more about Marion's early years. I told them how I ended up on the pit crew for one of the Indy teams. Admitted that I am a replacement for one of the team members whose father was seriously ill, and that I would have to look for a new job by the end of June, if not earlier. I admitted that I had some savings and that I wouldn't mind opening my own workshop one day. It was just a matter of finding a suitable place to settle. There's no better place than Florida, was Daniel's opinion. This guy really loved the Sunshine State. We finished dinner, and I had to go back to get some sleep. There was a race tomorrow, and I shouldn't have come in sleep-deprived. We exchanged email addresses and phone numbers before I got into a taxi and headed back to my hotel. Racing is a fun activity. I wondered why so many companies and individuals get involved, owning cars and competing at a championship level. Every machine has thousands of components, most of which can fail, and when a crash occurs, the car does not finish. There are also pilots. You could have a great driver who could make one mistake in 200 laps that could change the outcome from a podium finish to a crash. Not to mention 32 other cars and drivers, all of whom are trying to keep your car and your driver from reaching the podium. The worst-case scenario is when another driver does something stupid or irresponsible and ends your race by crashing into your car. On that Sunday, everything worked out for the best. The car worked flawlessly. Our pilot remained calm and controlled the car perfectly. It was magic. We finished second, our first time on the podium this season. The only thing that dampened my feeling of euphoria was that the guy I was temporarily filling in for returned on Monday morning, ready to return to the team. I got my last paycheck, a decent bonus, and a handshake. I probably would have missed the race. The guy tried to return on Saturday, but all flights to Indianapolis were booked until Monday morning. I received a lovely email from Marion. She congratulated me on our second place and expressed hope that we would have another chance to meet. She signed, "Your friend, Marion, which meant a lot to me. I stopped by the Hyatt on Monday after completing track work. Butch has already left. I thought about going to Polk, but decided it was stupid. I was an unemployed mechanic who only had feelings that maybe Marion and I had found each other on some level. She is beautiful, charming, smart, and has this vibe that made me want to get to know her better. But for some reason, I just couldn't take the risk again. What if she doesn't see me as anything more than a friend? Can I handle another disappointment? I decided, what the hell, I'm going to go to Florida. I spent a long weekend with Audrey and Daniel. Daniel took me on his boat, and we spent a wonderful day fishing, drinking beer, and sharing life stories. Then I went to the Keys, up to Miami, where I found a great job. I worked for a high-end used luxury car dealer in Miami. A garage in Phoenix gave me a great recommendation, and the dealer hired me to fill the spot. All these newly minted professional athletes and pop stars who hung out with other beautiful people on South Beach. They all needed expensive cars to drive to the nightclubs and restaurants on Ocean Drive. We sold them used cars worth $100,000, and I made sure the cars worked perfectly. I had been working there for 3 months when I received an email from Marion. The letter had 2 attachments. One of them was a screenshot of an advertisement from Polk's weekly newspaper. For sale. Ready-to-use business, car service and gas station. Includes a building and all equipment for servicing old and modern models, foreign and domestic. The owner-operator is retiring. One is a current mechanic and one is a secretary. Both want to stay employed. Price is negotiable. Excellent business opportunity. Solid customer base in a mid-sized city. Serious inquiries only. Contact Jason Martin, a tornabroker at 555 555 555. The text of the email read, Dear Harry, I wrote and rewrote this letter because I don't know how you feel about me. We spent only 2 evenings together and were never alone, only those and 2 meetings in my office. But every time I look at you, I see that you are looking at me, and I think that this is a look of something more than just desire. I never told you how much I appreciate what you did for me. By refusing to sell what you called a crap system, you may have saved my job. I know you lost a commission because of this. I also know that you contacted Rose and helped her renegotiate her contract. She used the money to upgrade servers and some monitors. Thanks from both of us. I am 34 years old. I have an 8-year-old son. I'm not looking for a man to support me because I have a good job and my own home. I might want another child, maybe 2. I love living in Polk, and I think you will love it here too. I remember you said that you would like to own your own car repair shop. I don't know if you can afford a store here in town, but I thought you should know it's for sale. I have a friend at a local bank. Perhaps I could say a good word for you, and she will help you get a loan. Perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself a little, but let me say it straight. I want you to move here and give us a chance to get to know each other better. I already know that you are a wonderful person. You are kind and honest. I think we can be friends, and I hope we can be lovers. Here, I said it. I want you to move here, fall in love with me, and become my husband. You may consider it extremely naive of me to suggest such a thing to a man with whom I have only been with a few times, but I have to admit that Audrey and Daniel shared a lot of what they learned about you when you stayed with them last summer. I know about Gwen and Haley and why you're still single at 36. I know you want to settle down one day and have kids, but only with the right woman. They told me all this and advised me to write to you this letter. Of course, you will have to share me with Ronnie, and you will have to love Ronnie like a son, but you already know that. So let me know if there's anything else you need to convince yourself to at least try. This is the craziest thing I've ever done in my life. But isn't that the essence of love? With all my love, Marion. The second attachment to the email was a photo of Marion and Ronnie standing on the porch of their home, both smiling at the camera. I called Jason Martin, the broker who was selling the auto repair shop. I asked him to send me the prospectus and all recent tax returns via overnight delivery, and at the same time made plans to come the following weekend to tour the business and property. The asking price was within my means. I still had most of my funds left over for other expenses. I called Marion and told her I'd be in town and asked if we could have a real date. Just the two of us while I'm in town. I didn't tell her I was coming to see the store. I didn't want to create expectations. You can call it whatever you want. In fact, I was already in love with Marion. But we really needed to spend time together to see if we could be more than friends. 3 months later. We're back to square one. I'm sitting on the back porch of the house I rent here in Polk, Indiana, watching the sunrise while sipping coffee from my special souvenir cup. On the other hand, I have a photo of Gwen. She was one of the most beautiful women you could meet. It's hard to believe that one person could be lucky enough to meet two such beautiful women with such wonderful qualities. I hear Audrey and Daniel stand up in the house. I ask them to come from Tampa to share in today's events. Marion doesn't know they're in town. Later today, I'm going to propose to Marion. The ring lies on the kitchen table. I showed it to Audrey, and she agreed that Marion would like it. The plan is to invite Marion and Ronnie to dinner and meet her at the door on one knee. I'll ask her to marry me, and then Audrey and Daniel will appear from the kitchen. I think it'll be a good day. Yes, in the last 3 months, I've bought a store, started dating Marion, and made sure that we can be friends, lovers, and good parents to Ronnie, and hopefully many more children in the future. Oh, by the way, Marion said yes, and we lived happily ever after. End. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.